Well, social media platforms, the various platforms that exist, are now a very significant part of how we communicate, really right from the personal and the private all the way through to public debate and public discussion as well. In fact, there is an increasing move towards getting your news primarily from social media as well, and that's a generational shift. Particularly younger generations are using social media predominantly as a source of news and information. So these platforms and the organizations and the individual journalists that are present on these platforms now have quite a significant role to play in informing people about what's going on in the world, in shaping public opinion. And of course, there is just genuinely a lot of debate about what's going on in the world happening on these platforms now. So increasingly, these platforms are really central to public discussion, public debate, public opinion formation. Increasingly, we hear from the news industry, from journalists, that it's very important to be present on social media, to have a personal presence on social media. That's becoming a hiring criterion now as well. So we've had some senior journalists say that you're not going to make it in journalism unless you've got a social media presence. That's the first thing. That's a fairly simple thing. But it also means, of course, acting professionally in a social media environment. That may mean having separate accounts for your professional and your private life, and keeping the private accounts quite private and separate, obviously. It also means, of course, engaging with other key players, other key accounts in this space, so the major politicians, the major journalists, the major news organizations, and trying to see how they operate in that space.
I think firstly I'm going to unpack that question a little bit and turn it around. So I think by thinking about how does social media shape us, it removes the agency from the individual and places too much emphasis on the platform. I think the better question to really ask is, how do we use social media, and what does that say about who we are and our practices within that? How does that shape how we participate with other types of publics as well? So I think it's also really pertinent to consider that social media is not this homogenizing concept, yet there's actually many different platforms that attract different cultures of use within the platform, and each of those platforms have different affordances, which means that enables us to communicate or do things with the platform differently on each of them. So therefore they're never the same thing. Within the context of my research, I'm looking at activist cultures and social movements, and I'm doing that within both a Western in the US and a non-Western concept in Egypt. And so I'm really looking at how activists are using what we call the affordances of visual social media, particularly to highlight instances of injustice, to make that visible, particularly where in non-democratic countries where media representation may be lacking. It comes down to the role of the citizen of making these things visible, not just for a local audience, but also importantly for a global audience, which can affect geopolitical relationships. So it can have a huge impact, particularly for those that are living in non-democratic settings. We take it for granted much of the time in the West that we have the ability to have freedom of speech. So I think social media enables a really fluid participatory culture, but with that also comes surveillance and implications as well. So it's not all complete utopian. We must consider the checks and balances on both sides of that.
So social media shapes interaction in the way that these platforms are designed, and also the way these platforms work with their algorithms, and also they shape interaction with their policies. So in terms of design, it really makes a difference if Facebook allows us to like content, but it doesn't allow us to dislike content. So this is shaping the way we are interacting. In terms of how they organize information, so they are much driven by engagement. So if we engage with the post by liking them, sharing them, or like having an account, having a lot of followers, it will be more easy for this account or this content to circulate more and to maybe be trending topic. So the algorithms pick into the content that is more popular. And in terms of how platforms shape social interactions with their policies, is because they have norms. So a few years ago, they didn't have, at the beginning, Twitter didn't have a hate speech policy. So it was kind of understood that it was completely freedom of expression. And increasingly, they are doing tougher norms on hate speech. But even if they have these like more complete policies, the way they enforce these policies is inconsistent. So if you have a policy on hate speech, but then you allow certain jokes or racist jokes or sexist jokes, this also shapes interaction on these platforms because users understand that this is allowed, even if there's a policy there. So I would say these three main aspects, though, the design, the processes, and the policies all shapes social interactions.
I think social media shapes and identifies us in massive ways. A lot of research is looking at these days the kind of ways that people interact with social media, and preliminary research is showing that we get kind of little dopamine hits whenever we get likes on social media, and so we're very much attracted to social media, to getting those likes, to getting attention and exposure to our work and to our lives and all that kind of stuff. And so for better or worse, that can often change how we present ourselves to others. And so if I'm not just trying to share something because I want to share it or because I'm passionate about it, but I'm trying to get likes and trying to get attention and exposure, maybe I am going to try to Photoshop myself differently or present myself in a different light than I would every day on the street. And so perhaps that gets us into kind of taking off all of our zits and perhaps maybe slimming up our bodies, making us look more tan, whatever it is. It has the potential to try to recreate the expectations of what is normal, what is human, all that kind of stuff. And so we can have some very altered perceptions about what is beautiful, what is normal, what is average, because of how much pressure we put on ourselves and how much incentive there is to produce content that gets likes.